Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little with jonathanlittlepoker.com, and today I want to share with you a hand from the 2015 World Series of Poker Main Event Final Table. This is actually the second hand of the day, and I found this situation quite interesting because the correct play for the player in question depends a ton on a lot of various concepts. So let's take a look at this chip stacks before we get started. The player in question here is going to be Chan. Notice Chan has 6,000 chips at 200, 400. It's worth mentioning that it's actually 200,000, 400,000, but I chopped off the last 3 zeros of all of the numbers to make things easier. So Chan has 15 big blinds, Budaroni has 15 big blinds, and then if you look around the table, everyone else has 40 big blinds or more, including the chip leader, McKeon. So knowing that, let's take a look at this hand. Everyone is going to fold around to McKeon. And in this spot, if you were in McKeon's shoes, what would you do? And I think the answer is to go all in with the vast majority of your hands. And the reason for that is because neither of these two players are going to go broke before the other player. At least that's what I thought before I actually looked at this hand. And the reason for that is because there is some amount of a payout jump. And when these guys both have roughly the same amount of a short stack, they don't really want to go broke. They're not trying to take a flip or anything like that. However, McKeon maybe should min-raise with all of his hands instead if he thinks that Chan and Budaroni are never going to go all in as a bluff. So that is certainly an option. But I do think that having a purely jamming or folding strategy in McKeon's shoes is a fine play. So what happens here is McKeon goes all in, and now Chan calls. And Budaroni folds. Which hands should these players have? I already said that I think McKeon should have a very wide range, especially given this is the second hand of the final table. But what hand should Chan call with? And to figure that out, we need to know a few factors. First, we have to know all the chip stacks at the table, which we already know. Second, we need to know the payouts. Here are the payouts for the final table. And if you take a look at this, 9th place, 8th place, and 7th place don't really get a big pay jump, which is kind of interesting. 10th place in this tournament was actually something like 750,000. So there was a 250,000 jump between 10th and 9th. And now it goes 100,000, 100,000, then does it even go up to 200,000. So really, even though the difference between 6th and 9th is $400,000 in cash, those payout jumps are actually not big at all. So for that reason, whereas most people normally will want to try to outlast their opponents in a final table scenario, these payouts are actually very flat. There's not much of a benefit from going from 9th to 6th, which is kind of interesting. So now that we know all of that, there's a program that you can use called ICMizer that will help you figure out what you should be doing in this spot, whether you should be calling or folding. So I've already entered the payouts. This is the payout structure for the World Series of Poker final table. These are in percentages. I actually just went through and entered all the exact numbers and it spit out those percentages. And here is the table we are looking at. I have this sized down a little bit so it can fit in the video nice and cleanly, but you can make this full screen on your computer so you can see everything very clearly. I've already entered all the chip stacks. And now we can determine which hands the button, McKeon, should be pushing. So we can click right here and actually tell the program which hands we think he's going to go all in with. And some people just mindlessly put in a very wide range. Well, let's say, for example, that we do think he's going all in with a mindlessly wide range, just anything that's reasonable. So then we close this. And now we can ask this program which hands should the hero, Chan, call with. Actually, no, in the hand he had King, Queen. But we also, before we get started, we have to ask which hands will the big blind call with if the hero folds and if the big blind, or if the hero from the small blind calls. So in this scenario, he's probably going to call very tight in one scenario. That's whenever the big blind goes all in as well. Let's maybe delete these. I think he's probably not going to call those if it goes shove, call. And then if McKeon shoves and the small blind folds, it's probably going to be a little bit more like this. So now we can click calculate. I'm actually using a FGS feature, which is not exactly ICM. ICM is individual chip modeling. it will tell you when you should be making a call or a fold. And in this exact scenario where McKeon is shoving incredibly wide, we see that king queen is a slightly profitable all-in, 0.21. Anything greater than maybe 0.15 is pretty much a spot where you just have to take the all-in. If you start getting lower, like 0.08, like king 10 offsuit, or something like 0.05, like pocket fives, these hands are very close to all-ins. And if you're trying to have an edge in the tournament, which most good players will want to have, you want to be avoiding these scenarios. You can actually type in this in the ICM dollar EV. You can say what the final table, the total prize pool at the final table is. There's actually roughly $25 million in play at the final table. We can close this and then click calculate again. It'll tell us how much money he makes by calling in this scenario, or loses by calling with a bad hand. So here he wins $52,700 by making this call versus making this fold, which looks great, right? However, is McKeon really shoving this wide? That's the tough thing that we have to figure out for ourselves. First off, I do not think McKeon's going to shove his best hands. I think he's definitely going to min raise these because these hands are very good and you really want action with them. So we can take those out. Is McKeon really jamming 5-2 suited? It's tough to know because in the actual hand, McKeon showed up with ace-4 offsuit, which is a very good standard shoving hand. So it's hard to actually deduce what his actual range is. Perhaps he min raises a lot of these very weak hands. It's difficult to say, but maybe he does. Maybe he is shoving a traditional range of just good hands like ace X, king X, and then perhaps some good Broadway hands. And these are hands that are going to be profitable to shove in most scenarios. And perhaps he's min raising some of these weaker hands. Perhaps he's min raising some of these hands. So yeah, let's give him a range like this. So now, what should we do with king queen offsuit? It turns out king queen is still a profitable shove, although we are now getting very close to a break-even spot. If we go back over here and just type in percentage EV, you'll see that it's only 0.15, right? So pretty close. And in this scenario, if you are a good player at the main event final table, you can pass up on small edges like this. And I think that this is the scenario we're looking at most of the time when he's going to be shoving a range like this. Let's say he gets even a little bit tighter and decides to min raise a lot of his more marginal hands. Although I do think that McKeon knows to jam a lot of these hands. I'm not saying that I don't think he's doing this. Let's suppose he min raises these, thinking that he can get away from them if he gets jammed on. Let's also say that I guess he's always jamming these. So let's run the program again. And now you can see that king queen is actually a fold, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people are never thinking to fold king queen to this 15 big blind button shove. But even with this flat payout structure, it could conceivably be a fold if we know that McKeon is implementing a min raise strategy with his best hands and worst hands, and a jamming strategy with his middle strength hands. And that's very important. And if I had a student going into this final table, as I did in the past, in one of the previous final tables, I would be running these simulations a lot, especially if I was one of the guys with a 15 big blind stack, or if I had the 15 big blind stacks very near me. And if I had to guess, I would say that McKeon's probably implementing the purely open shove strategy, and he's probably shoving very wide. But it's tough to say. It really is very, very difficult to say. You can actually click this button here, and it will tell you which hands all the players should be shoving and calling with if they were all playing perfectly. And that's useful to know if you're playing against very good players or players who have this program and know how to use it. But for the most part, you really don't have to be too concerned with playing perfectly and unexploitably, because you make a lot more money in poker if you can exploit your opponents to the maximum. So, as you can see, it suggests McKeon shove all of these hands. Obviously, it's suggesting only push or fold strategies. It's not saying to min raise any of the best hands or anything like that. And it's saying that the hero should be calling with pocket sixes or better, ace 5 suited or better, ace 8 offsuit or better, king 10 suited or better, and king jack offsuit or better. So in a absolute perfect world where you were trying to be completely unexploitable, this is roughly the range you would call with. So given all the information, I do think that Chan made a good call with his king-queen suited. However, whenever I first started watching the final table, I was not aware of the exact payout structure. Let's actually change it to the payout structure I thought we were going to be looking at. Notice here that first place is a little bit less, and there are actual payout jumps. At the bottom, it goes from 4% to 5.5% to 6.25% to 7%. If we look at the actual structures, it goes 4, 4.5, 4.8, then finally 5.7. So take a look at sixth place here. It is 5.7. Over here, and what it typically is more like 7%. So in a standard payout structure, we can give McKeon perhaps the same somewhat crazy shoving range as I thought he might have, because I do think this is probably what he's doing in this spot. I think that would be a good play. Let's give him a pretty wide range. We can find what Chan should be calling within the small blind now, given that there are actual payout jumps. As you can see, king-queen is still fine. But if we go back and we tighten up the shoving range of McKeon to that more sort of standard-ish shoving range I think a lot of people would be shoving with in this spot, which is basically just going to be hands that are somewhat good but not good enough to where you want to min raise and see a flop. Perhaps something like this. Let's also take out the good hands, because obviously he's not shoving the best hands. I think that would probably be a leak. We can now see if Chan should be calling with the king-queen, given there are actual payout jumps now. And as you can see at this point, king-queen is just barely profitable, right? And this is not even assuming that McKeon's shoving very tight. This is giving him all the king X's, which king-queen does great against. Maybe he doesn't shove the worst kings. Who knows? Maybe he implements a min-raising strategy. So what this goes to show you is that the payout structure is very important. If the payouts are even just a little bit different in this spot, I think king-queen goes from a somewhat easy call to where you just have to get it in, as Chan did, to a spot where you very easily could consider folding. Something else worth noting is the hands like ace-2, ace-6 offsuit. These hands are very, well, not very easy, but close enough to easy folds. And even small pairs are not amazing whenever your opponent is probably shoving a somewhat tight range. So this program I've been using is called ICMizer, and you can get your copy. It is a paid program. You do have to pay for it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/ICM. And on this site, there actually are a lot of various other programs, including a hand replayer, a sit-and-go coach feature, which will basically quiz you on these scenarios and ask you which hands you should be calling with. And if you play tournaments where the stacks are short, I strongly suggest you check out this program, and that will be most tournaments. Because if you can find yourself at a final table in situations like this, where your opponents are going to play very poorly, you can make a lot of money if you know how to play a somewhat unexploitable strategy. So check it out, jonathanlittlepoker.com/ICM, and let me know what you think. I'll talk to you next time.